they all had the same script of I come from a humble background, and that's not going to cut it for the younger generation, because they don't want cookie cutter politicians anymore. They want politicians who have well developed thoughts. They don't want politicians who just toe the party line.
This election is an opportunity for us to talk about taboo issues, talk about healing issues, talk about humanity issues, all of which are interrelated and all of which are linked to practical issues like cost of living.
When this set of boundaries were revealed, in March, some opposition parties said, well, we knew there would be changes. We don't like it, but nevertheless, we'll press on and we will do what we need to. And I think that's the kind of spirit that is a Singaporean spirit, not beaten down. Let's go on, let's fight on.
I hope in the 9 days, we will hear about how am I going to solve this problem. That these are the things I'm going to do. And I will not solve this overnight. I'll solve it over a period of time. If this does not come out in the 9 days, I think, you will have problem attracting the younger voters to believe you that, that you can actually solve this problem and that I should vote for you.
Welcome to IQ. You know what IQ stands for, right? What does IQ stand for?
Inconvenient questions.
Inconvenient questions. Yeah. It's the questions that may be inconvenient, but you don't need to be inconvenienced in the way you answer the question. So feel free to speak your mind. This is election 2025. Nomination day is going to be on the 23rd of this month, April, and polling day is going to be on the 3rd of May. Right. Now it's interesting because it's going to be May Day, and the day after would be cooling off day, and then you've got this. Some people say that the ruling party has an advantage because that's the last thing you hear and it's a big bang. What are your thoughts, Inderjit?
By the way, we have had May elections a few times. I did too. So May Day rally is always an advantage for the party. But this time round is on the cooling off day. But I want to say to every other party that, come on, in that 9 days, if you could not say what you wanted to say, that last day is not going to make a difference.
That's true. That's true. Okay, now some of the key facts so that our viewers and all of us are aligned. Number one, it's the 16th. It's actually the 16th general election in Singapore, if you include 1959 and 1963. But if you start with independence, 1965, this would be the 14th. 2.75 million eligible voters, 33 constituencies, the largest ever, 18 GRCs and 15 SMCs, single-member constituencies. 97 seats will be contested. 30 new faces, this is the largest number in the recent history of elections in Singapore. And in 2020, the PAP won with a 61.24% majority. And in 2015 was much higher, 69.9%, almost 70%. And last but certainly not least, this is Lawrence Wong's first general election as Prime Minister and especially as Secretary General of the ruling party, of the party, PAP. Okay, let me do a quick introduction of the panelists. Inderjit Singh needs no introduction, but I'll introduce anyway. 4-term PAP MP. He is a prolific entrepreneur and a very sought after and respected political commentator. Juliana Frederick, founder of a very cool podcast platform. And what is it called?
Lepak Conversations.
And what does lepak mean?
Lepak means to chill.
To chill.
Yeah.
Are you a chill person?
I try to be.
But you also work for AMP, Association of Muslim Professionals.
Yeah, I've been supporting them with their rebranding efforts. So I think they want to bring back the spirit of advocacy that they started with. And as an advocate myself, I resonate with that mission. So I'm on board to help them refine their messaging, but I think more importantly, reach out to the younger audience that actually don't know what AMP does, but they do very important work.
And Dr. Gillian Ko from Institute of Policy Studies, IPS. You've been there for how many years now?
Oh dear.
Were you there from the start?
No. I was there on its 10th year, so I've been there for quite a while now.
You don't want to say give the number. And you, as a senior research fellow, what exactly do you do?
Well, the Institute of Policy Studies is a public policy think tank that focuses on how we can improve governance in Singapore. And my particular beat has always been about how to improve the relationship that the government has with citizens, and to also understand how the bureaucracy operates within a changing political landscape.
Let's go to a recent survey, by Black Box Research. This quarterly survey of 1,500 Singapore citizens, and it's called Sensing SG. Now, the latest report just came out last week, and it said, among other things, that Prime Minister Lawrence Wong's popularity rating is at an all-time high of 75%, which is really incredible, right? Given the fact, especially that he had a pretty short runway to becoming Prime Minister and Party Secretary General and so on. And it augurs well for Singapore that the Prime Minister has a strong standing, especially in the current circumstances. But what else is interesting in the research is that leader of the opposition, Pritam Singh, his popularity rating is 71%, right? Now, some people are saying this is quite incredible that he got this 71% popularity rating in spite of the court trial where he was charged with lying. What are your thoughts about this? Why do you think Pritam's ratings went up? It went up by 8 percentage points from the earlier quarter.
I think two factors. One is his performance in Parliament. I think, his debates very well, appears like a good statesman when he, speaks in Parliament. So I think, he's been popular all along. But the recent case against him and the outcome, while he lost, he was found guilty, I think the younger generation have a lot more sympathy than maybe the older generation. So I think if you look at it, maybe the younger generation felt that, he was victimized.
Is that true? Is that how the younger generation view it?
I think last GE was quite revealing for a lot of new voters. That was when it feels like because of Workers' Party's online presence, it resonated very strongly with the younger generation. And I do think because of that, because they have empathy towards him and they stand by his values, perhaps their rating of him would not drop just because of the trial case.
Well, Jill, some people say that it's not that in spite of what happened, it's actually because of the court trial that his popularity rating went up. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think it is a little bit about that, but it's also how he made sense of it. And when he was asked after the verdict was delivered that he was found guilty of lying, the media asked him, well, will you be standing down as Sec-Gen of WP? And he said, au contraire, I won't be stepping down, I will be stepping up. And I think that for a good segment of Singaporeans, we're used to kind of not being beaten down, but actually celebrate, that kind of resilience. As much as the PAP says, that they are resilient, but Singaporeans, more importantly, are resilient, seen ourselves through many crises, including COVID-19. Let's cite a few more opposition politicians, if you don't mind. I think, of course, we recognize that there were sweeping changes to electoral boundaries, and of course opposition knows that would happen, but they always oblige themselves to say, well, these are sweeping boundaries and all that. Similarly, when this set of boundaries were revealed, in March, some opposition parties said, well, we knew there would be changes. We don't like it, but nevertheless, we'll press on and we will do what we need to. And I think that's the kind of spirit that is a Singaporean spirit, not beaten down. Let's go on. Let's fight on. I'll make my best case possible as much as you will make your best case
Instead
possible.
of griping and grumbling
Absolutely.
about that. And
Absolutely.
you brought up a very important point. That was quite admirable. None of them actually sat there and griped. I mean, of course, there was some frustration. You could say it'll be inhuman or non-human if you don't have that frustration. But very soon it was about, what do we do? Let's
It's
get
in
moving.
the same sentence, and it's the same way in which we were told about, of course, to be expected, the short 9-day campaigning between 23rd April, 3rd of May. The opposition party said, as usual, it's very short. This is terrible. Singapore Democratic Party said this is, smash and grab tactics. But nonetheless, in the same sentence, we're going to press on, carry on, and do what we have to do. So I think that is quintessentially Singaporean. And I think that's probably why there was a bit of a bump up in terms of popularity for Pritam Singh.
And to add to what you're saying, see, Inderjit, you said earlier sympathy. I would beg to differ a little bit. I don't think it was sympathy. It's a lot more what Jill said. It's got to do with admiration for that resilience. Sympathy has a different connotation. You feel sorry for the guy. I think it is more admiration for how he took the punch in his cheek and said, look, let's move on. So,
but nonetheless, I think we have to still remember the background of that whole case. And I think
the background of the case. I mean,
it's
at the end of the day, the judgment has been passed.
Yeah.
And I
it's
don't want to
being
question
appealed.
the judgment. Yeah. But what's important is, how did the parties involved take it and move on? Right. Now, the other interesting finding in that survey, the black box survey, the latest one, is that 4 out of 10 Singaporeans said that they've made up their mind, they're voting for the PAP. Okay, but 3 out of 10 have said they're undecided. And the majority of those who said they're undecided, they're still trying to see what happens in the hustings of the election, were young people. It's not that they are indecisive, but they naturally constitute the swing votes.
Yeah.
Right? Now, how do you feel? I mean, are you going to make up your mind in the next few days, especially from nomination day onwards? What happens? Is it the rallies that will help you make up your mind? Is it sessions like this? Or is it personalities?
I do feel like generally the younger generation, they're not bent on one or the other because they have that openness mindset. Okay, I'll wait and see which party says what. And then there are new changes like I'm now in an SMC as opposed to a GRC. So I'm not sure how that affects my voting, but that's also something I have to look out for. So yeah, I think it also boils down to the fact that there is no proper culture or platform to develop youth critical thinking, especially when it comes to politics and policies. And that was precisely why I started Lepak Conversations. I was a first-time voter, and when I was handed that, I was like, wow, this is such a powerful tool that I have. And, such a huge stake is such a huge chances at stake, in initial building, and I don't know what to do about it. So Lepak Conversations and a lot of other platforms that have emerged because of social media have become that resource for youth to learn slowly, I think, and to create that culture internally, to be curious about the different parties. And I think just going back to what we spoke about with Pritam, I think youths have this sensibility to try to understand how governments work, how it's like with a supermajority versus the opposition, what the challenges of an opposition leader is. And I think there is I think the youths are a lot more sensible in looking out for all of these different nuances instead of, leaning towards one another.
So, Inderjit, this question is for you, right? Harpreet Singh. I keep hearing from people who are generally quite critical. Say, yeah, but he's riding on his personality. There's no substance. He is not telling us what he will do if he goes in as an MP. What is his manifesto? And so on. Is that what is expected of an MP? I mean, that you have to come up with a manifesto, you have to come up with very well thought out policies, or is it his values? Is it issue that he has got commitment, conviction as an MP for 4 terms, and now being able to step back and reflect on it. What do you think are the critical factors and qualities that you would like to see in MPs?
I think it's going to be the conviction that they have to represent the beliefs that they believe in. Having a personal manifesto, I think, is unrealistic. Anyway, the parties will have their manifestos, and how Harpreet or any one of the opposition members address and talk about how they are going to implement some of the things in the manifesto will make a difference. But to have a personal manifesto is a bit unrealistic and it's a bit unfair to be expected. None of us in the PAP had our own personal manifestos also. So how I think he's going to present and argue some of the points that they may bring up, some of the policies that they want to change, that will make a difference. And that will also reflect how much he really believes in it, or is it just to impress others. So I think that will be something that not just the young, everyone will look out for.
Is there any particular quality that you think we need to see in MPs, given today's circumstances?
So I think there are lots of issues on the ground, and whether you understand those issues well enough, and then
would you say knowledge, deep understanding
of what are the issues, but I think the good candidates, whether PAP or opposition, would have spent some time on the ground way before this GE, right? So if by now they have not understood and get a good feel of what are the issues, the knowledge of what is important, what is going to be useful for them to speak about at the campaign and whatever opportunity they have on what they're going to do about it. If they really knew what the issues are, they will have good arguments. If not, then they will have just surface arguments.
Right. Jill.
We've conducted surveys on that.
Yes.
So every time a GE is over, we run a post-election survey. One section of that survey focuses on the qualities of candidates. We ask people, here's a list of qualities, what was top of mind when you were assessing the candidates as you went to the ballot box. And the qualities that regularly feature at the top of that list would be somebody who is efficient, somebody who is fair-minded, and somebody who knows how I feel about things. Now, of course, the first 2 qualities, are things that you will... Efficient, fair-minded, somebody who knows how I feel. So some of these qualities are something that you only understand of a candidate if he or she has already been working the ground. For instance, is a long-standing PAP MP, or in this case now, I suppose the alternate team has been there for, since 2011, and they can be assessed. So there would be a bias towards incumbents in that respect. The thing that's different today, and of course Juliana will say this, is a different media landscape where, candidates who are new can actually, portray themselves, bring themselves to an audience, talking about what they've done in the past and, talk about issues so that, the audiences can understand the extent to which, the candidate identifies with a certain segment. And then the audiences can also see whether, this is a person who understands my pain or my hopes and my aspirations. So the media landscape now allows for, all of us to get past just the power of incumbency. And in the case of Mr. Harpreet Singh, he's actually been on a very lengthy podcast explaining what he stands for, what his key beefs in public policy are, and what he hopes to do. So I would just correct that, Viswa.
Correct what?
The impression that people don't know what he stands for and what he would like to. And I'm not his agent, so I'm not going to tell you. You have to go watch the podcast.
No, I watched the podcast.
In addition to what, the PAP MPs do as well, but they have a very broad party brand. They have, most of them had time on the ground to really show and demonstrate how they might be efficient or fair-minded, and have that sense of empathy, basically.
How do you draw a distinction between someone who has deep convictions and who speaks very well, and who is good looking on top of that, right? I mean, these things do collectively shape the way we view someone. How do you draw a distinction between someone like that and a charlatan? You know, someone who just goes out there and beyond this, there's no substance. Or worse, who's trying to manipulate the ground.
Well, they might still make it at the ballot box, but
They
you
might.
will have to give them the 4 years to prove themselves. And that's rather important.
Yeah.
I think, unfortunately, we've seen that happen in the case of the PAP as much as WP in this parliamentary term that's just, we've just seen the
Sure.
back off. So
all I'm
will still require
saying is
some time.
whether during the hustings,
Yeah.
you know, there are certain things that you look out for. You know, I'm just getting a sense. It's not something that is necessarily researched, but something based on your own life experience. You know, I mean, Inderjit, are there certain things that you'd advise our viewers to look out for?
It's very easy to be a populist and, try to say nice things that will attract people's attention. But I think it's important that...
And sensational things.
And sensational things too. So it's important that people look beyond that and understand whether, do these really represent what I see as issues? And does this person really understand how to solve these issues?
Yeah.
So I think if, let's say, we don't scrutinize critical thinking, like what Gillian mentioned, I think it's so important, especially for the young, that to go beyond what they say, but to understand whether do they really mean it and can they really solve my problem?
Right.
Whether as a ruling party MP or an opposition who has to bring these issues up in Parliament. And in the past, when I was in 20 years in Parliament, I think I could not see that kind of concrete, great ideas coming out from the opposition. And so that's why they have not made significant inroads into Parliament yet.
Would you say that this time round, the key opposition parties or alternative parties, like the Workers' Party, PSP, perhaps SDP, whether they they have come up with manifestos, they've all come up with manifestos now that are a lot more well thought out, deep, and practicable.
Yeah. So yes, I think the three parties that you mentioned have given a lot of thought, and I think they've got a lot of support now compared to the parties in support in the past. So they've got many people who may help them to understand issues, come up with great ideas. People who know what can work and what cannot work, and they put it into their manifesto. So I think they have come up with great ideas, and this will be a big challenge to the PAP. PAP has released a manifesto today. I think what is going to be important, how are you going to achieve it? So they have to, very good slogans, but I think in the 9 days they have to talk about how am I going to implement some of these things. If that does not come out, I think then the other opposition parties may have an upper hand. But I think the PAP will probably be able to do.
But I think the point here is that we need to look beyond slogans, beyond those big words and big ideas, and really, in some instances, get down to a fine combination between values, conviction, and substance. Right?
But you have to take the time to do it.
Of course.
And in the case of the incumbent, you also, when you're matching manifesto to manifesto, the incumbent also has a track record, has been a discussion of how they view policy, but also implementation. That really takes quite a lot of time.
So the question here is, in this election, is it an advantage to be incumbent or actually a disadvantage?
I think it's a disadvantage. We are facing lots of issues. Let's just talk about inflation and cost of living. It's a global problem.
Yeah.
Every government in the world is facing this problem. So, and things like this cannot be solved overnight.
But they are held accountable.
And they're going to be held accountable. Yeah. And it'll be easy for any other party to think about alternative things. For example, housing.
Yeah.
Someone, just talked about, let's put in the Australian model. Foreigners can buy, I have to sell to locals. So easy to do that, but whether are there better ideas from the PAP? I think that's going to make a very, very big difference for the party. So I would say for PAP this time round, housing and cost of living are going to be huge issues. They just cannot say, trust me, I can solve these problems. That's not going to work anymore. I hope in the 9 days, it is come out in the manifesto, in the 9 days, we will hear about how am I going to solve this problem. That these are the things I'm going to do, and I will not solve this overnight. I'll solve it over a period of time. If this does not come out in the 9 days from now till polling day, I think you will have problem attracting the younger voters to believe you that that you can actually solve this problem and that I should vote for you.
What's your response to that, Julian?
I think we were talking about Harpreet Singh, and I think what stands out about him is that he has this sense of conviction, and it seems like his thoughts are his own. There was a compilation video of when PAP unveiled their candidates. They all had the same script of I come from a humble background, and that's not going to cut it for the younger generation, because they don't want cookie cutter politicians anymore. They want politicians who have well developed thoughts. They don't want politicians who just toe the party line. They want someone who is willing to take a bit more risk, because again, we live in a ever evolving world. It's very disruptive, and younger generation wants a politician to give them the confidence that they can think of different creative ideas to make sure that Singapore can tide through disruptive times.
So during this election, as a young voter, during the hustings in the coming weeks, do you think it's important for you to hear some concrete, actionable ideas, or is that less critical? Is conviction and belief more important?
I would say conviction isn't as important. I think earlier we discussed, if someone is very good at speaking, is that enough? I don't think it's enough for the younger generation. I think having concrete plans is important, especially with the tariffs that have come up. I think I am sensing, even with the younger generation, there's a lot of confusion because it's something very new to them. And so I have friends who are actually waiting to see what other parties, what kind of solutions the other parties will propose for that. So I think the younger generation are indeed looking out for very clear.
But you're not necessarily looking at the minutiae, the minute details, but some broad strokes of what you have in mind.
Yeah.
You can't just go there and talk about conviction. So you need the balance between the two. We're coming to the end of the discussion, so I just want to shift gears a bit. The PAP is generally been pushing a particular scenario, which is there are no guarantees that we would be returned as the government and so on. Do you think that approach actually has been gaining traction on the ground? People are concerned about it, or are people sort of have the conclusion, no, the PAP will be returned to power, possibly on nomination day, which has been the case in various elections. Who wants to go first, Jill or Inderjit?
For sure, they are not going to get returned for power on nomination day. There are so many parties out there.
Yeah.
All the seats are going to be, challenged. So I think they won't form. So that scenario is out. But yes, when I speak to people, many of them say that we want a strong government, but we also want our check. So I think this is the risk that PAP talks about. If every constituency talks about this, then we could end up in a situation that could backfire. But we're also hearing quite smart views from the opposition candidates that, Singapore is where it is because we've got a strong civil service, having strong government and having strong opposition forms an even stronger system that can serve us better. So I think this argument may not be so effective anymore. I think it's because of the quality of candidates that have now appeared in the opposition camp, at least some of the serious parties. We talk about Harpreet, he's a senior counsel. No one can doubt his capability and his intellectual capability, right? So I think similarly, there are many others like that. So this is therefore is going to be a battle of what we talked about, conviction, ideas, and the young, because I know I've got children, they in the last election, they wanted to see who are the candidates. They were not going to just vote for PAP because I'm a PAP member, but they were going to look at what have these people got to offer. So it will be candidate to candidate comparison in each of the constituency. So it's so important that all the parties who are serious put in candidates that can match, and then conviction and ideas that are more superior. That's the only way to win. Otherwise, I think this old strategy of we may not form government. It's not going to work.
Yeah, and to add on to that, the two dimensions. One is the flight to safety. This came up, especially with Trump and the tariffs. That usually this flight to safety thing kicks in, which is I want a stable government. I want a stronger government. So that's one argument. The other one is, if you remember, soon after the 2020 election, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, then Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, spoke in Parliament, and he used the term free riders, to characterize Singaporeans who want the cake and eat it, which is we won the PAP as a government. At the same time, we want a lot more opposition voices. Do you think that's going to be a critical consideration for voters this time?
Well, let me go back to your initial question, where you noted that the Sec-Gen of PAP said, well, it's going to be difficult. Every seat will be contested. I would say a few things. First, I think the message is that the PAP is not taking voters for granted and votes for granted. And I think that's a very good and important starting point, which means that they will work very hard to prove their case of what they've done since 2020, policy reforms, why, what's the rationale, and also policy proposals yet to be implemented. So I think that's very important. Second point is, again, Mr. Lawrence Wong had said at the November 24 party conference that if people tell you that the PAP will be wiped out, well, that's not really a scenario that's going to happen. Nor is the scenario that the opposition will be wiped out really going to happen. But he acknowledged that there are a few seats that are very hot. They are marginal seats from 2020, and that's what's of interest to us. And the question...
What are some of these seats?
The previous ones were, of course, the 2020 East Coast GRC, which has now been changed, and there still remains an East Coast GRC reconfigured. Yeah. And that's the first one. The second one, of course, was the 2020 West Coast GRC, contested by PSP against a team led by Desmond Lee. And that's been reconfigured, but Mr. Desmond Lee, who's assisted Sec-Gen of PAP, will be helming, West Coast, Jurong West GRC. So that's another one. Where the boundaries haven't changed is Bukit Panjang. And this is where PAP's Liang Ying-Hua faced off with SDP's Paul Tambaya. It was a very close fight. So we're looking at, just in 2020, a margin of 2,000, just under 2,500 votes. So that's another hotly contested one where the boundaries haven't changed. So I would just say that, there was acknowledgement that there are some hot seats. 3 or 4 constituencies could fall. And he went on to say we would lose 4 or 5 ministers. And I think that's a more realistic scenario. So, and finally, I would say this, that it is indeed critical to recognize that voters have had a choice right across the island since 2011. And, in 2020, 11 parties contested. We're not short of that level of contestation. But the takeaway is this, that voters are discerning. And we talked about qualities, but also issues. And when they go through the 9-day period, when it's confirmed after nomination day, who's going to be standing against the PAP team, then it's a real weighing up of who's the opposition, who are not just the personalities and the parties, but what's the manifesto and the track record. And in the case of the PAP, they do have the performance of that many years and really also policy reforms, but also policy suggestions going forward. So I think the difficulty, therefore, is really to catch up on all of that and weigh it up against the opposition that would, don't have that much time and haven't been in power to actually implement some of these things, although Workers' Party itself has come up with a statement that at least 15 ideas have been taken up with some iteration or the other. Can I just quickly say, when we talk about minimum wage, we already have a system that is minimum wage plus, which is the progressive wage model. So it's always very easy, because I'm in this policy space, to kind of come up with the quick sound bites with unemployment benefits. But it's really modulating that or calibrating it for conditions that are suitable for Singapore, but also for the culture in Singapore. So when we talk about support for those who are involuntarily unemployed in Singapore, taxpayers will say, we can't just give money out for nothing. And therefore, that's why conditional cash transfers, which is the system we see now with the job seeker support system, actually is probably one that is more suited. And that's where the refinement is required and should be recognized.
I would say that there are pros and cons. I would still say there are pros and cons. We don't have the luxury of time today to debate.
But it's really the messages and how you receive them, and then as voters, how to assess them before you get to 3rd of May.
Absolutely. And as you said, the voting populace has matured. Yeah. They are not people who just buy whatever koyo you sell to them. I think it's important that we give sufficient credit to people for asking inconvenient questions, not with an agenda necessarily, but because it matters. I would like to bring this discussion to a close by asking each one of you this question. Is there something other than the usual issues, cost of living, housing, and so on, apart from all that, is there something at an emotional level, at a personal level, that you would like talked about in this election? And it's not, I say again, I'm not talking about those usual issues, something beyond that, something that personally resonates with you.
I think the challenge is choosing one.
Yeah.
And for me, it's really, sorry to say, it's really the interaction between the international and local. And come on, let's face it, the whole world is now grappling with Trump's Liberation Day policies. It's not us jumping up and down, it's everyone. And so how do we respond? What is that strategy for business resilience, which has a knock-on for employment resilience and the resilience of households? That is what I would be interested in listening to. And I think that's really, really fundamental. How should we view the current crisis and what is its impact? Because surely it'll have a knock-on effect on very many things.
Like?
Well, if the tariffs go up, they are implemented, and we are selling intermediate goods to all the other markets where the tariffs are huge, then certainly the demand for what we have will come down, and the knock-on effect will be on businesses here. Even if directly Singapore suffers just a 10% tariff, universal tariff, selling everything out to the US directly. So then if businesses have to, in anticipation, crunch down what they do, then they are going to freeze hiring or even cut hiring. That would have a knock-on on jobs and resilience on the employment front, which means that as consumers, we are also going to be scared. The flip side, therefore, we want to hear is, well, if the rest of the world cannot sell to the US, will there be a flooding of supply of what we need, which is a good thing, to us? And maybe inflation can be managed that way, because, we've been grappling with supply chain disruptions since COVID, and Ukraine war made it worse. And so we're looking at that. And so there are many sides there should be two sides to a coin, but many sides to any of this policy debate. Yeah. And that's what I would really like to look at, because Singapore literally is not an island on its own.
And we can't ignore the international issues.
Yeah. So for me, I'm looking for the interaction between the international and the local.
Got it. Thank you.
I think trust and confidence are going to be the keywords for all parties, especially for the ruling party, PAP, right? So you can't just say, trust me, I will solve your problems. Vote for me and we will take care of everything. Over the years, you can't pass trust from one generation to another. You have to earn it, right? And I think it is becoming more and more challenging. Trust is eroding over a period of time for various reasons. And so I hope that in this 9 days of campaigning, we can hear from everyone, and especially from the PAP, that that we really believe that they can solve the problem. For the young, you cannot just tell them, trust me, I'll do it. You really need to build a sense of hope and confidence and opportunity. Because of all the challenges that we discussed, it's going to be a very challenging world. And it's important, at least for the PAP, to be able to show that, believe me, I can do this. Forward Singapore has gone on, some things have come up, but I've not seen concrete things. And I hope that the manifesto and the campaign will show this up.
And through examples, real examples.
Real example,
to illustrate the
real
point.
believable stories.
Okay.
So now if let's say PAP says, don't worry, I'll take care of cost of living and I'll solve the housing problem. That's all they have said so far. I want to know, how are you going to do it? If they can do it effectively, they'll win back the support that they've lost.
Thank you. Juliana?
What I want to see moving forward is, I think, less oversimplifying and distilling of certain issues and pegging it to communities. And I say this because demographics and identities are becoming a lot more layered, and even within certain groups, there's a lot more fragmentation. So you can't lump youth as monolithic and an ethnic group as monolithic. And I think specifically coming from the Malay Muslim community, I wish to see that issues stop being pegged as Malay Muslim issues as opposed to national issues. I think framing it as a minority problem, a Malay Muslim issue, forces us to self-organize and solve the problems on our
Are you
own.
referring to any specific issue?
I have a specific example, and it's the Tudong issue, and that's the first issue that Lipat Conversations advocated for. It was a long-standing issue, I think almost 20 decades, but when we came in, what was different was that we opened up the space, we made it easy for people to understand that this is a Singaporean problem. A significant population of Muslim women are being denied job opportunities because they're not able to wear the tudong. And that opened up the conversations to non-Muslims, non-Malays, and they were able to see how this is a national problem, and they were able to advocate and push for better policies for Muslim women. And we did see a year later at the National Day rally that Muslim healthcare workers are allowed to wear the tudong. So I think that's just one instance of how solidarity from fellow Singaporeans can help to uplift especially minority and vulnerable communities.
Prime Minister Lawrence Wong recently, a few days ago, actually addressed young people. And he said, and I quote, he said, "We hear you, I hear you." What do you think he meant by that?
I think he's trying to say that he's putting in an effort to listen to the youth, and I think he has. I mean, with the Forward SG exercise, and I've seen a lot more youth dialogues happening with IHLs, universities, polys, at every level. There are all these dialogue sessions happening. But I think what the youth seek is not just for you to hear me. I want to know that you take my views seriously and that you actually table it, and I want to know the outcome of that. So I don't think it's enough for them to be heard. I think they want to see some sort of tangible action be taken, and in that sense too, so that they can see that their leaders are accountable.
So back to the point, implementation, don't just say.
Sorry, but may I stereotype?
Sure.
The youth are particularly concerned about climate change. They will have to suffer the consequences of climate change. And I think Youth Voice was actually very, very strong on that. And we see in, 2022, the launch of the PAP's Green Plan, which is a whole of Singapore, whole of government approach to, looking at sustainability and implementing very, very many programs and policies to do that. So I think actually, sometimes it's also helpful that segments of the population, even if it's got to be labeled as youth, and youth who care about the future and who care about the green, it is also a very, very strong platform for advocacy. We can also talk about, as I mentioned, the international issues, and of course we
You're talking
think
about Gaza.
of the Israel-Hamas war. And I think that that's the opposite example, where it isn't just an issue that concerns the Malay Muslim community, that, we're all concerned about the humanitarian aspects of this, even if the actual ongoing conflict between these two peoples is probably not going to be solved anytime soon, or,
Right.
till new heaven and new earth. But I cast that as an example again of where, on the other hand, it isn't just the concern of one group, but it is a universal concern. And there, progress can be made because we all speak up together in the spirit of solidarity that Yulania talked about.
what I'm hearing is
Yeah.
that
All means and methods.
no, we are all
If they matter.
interrelated. It may be too simplistic for us to say this is a youth issue, because youths are parents. Parents are concerned about the youth. If the youths can't afford to buy HDB, it becomes an issue that the senior citizens are
But
also
often
bothered
it's the
about.
parents' generation that want a good return when they sell
I
their
understand,
flats.
but what I'm-
And they're selling to the next generation,
I
their
understand.
children's
See,
generation.
the point I'm
So
trying to
it's
make, Jill,
linked up.
is that it's all interconnected, interrelated,
Right.
And we should avoid overly segmentalizing society because you have a spillover, right?
I
Now,
guess my point is really that we have to look at each issue and
of
then
course,
see
of
what is
course.
the relevant
But
constituency.
even each issue
Yeah.
today is so complex
Yes.
that there's a spillover.
Yeah, of
So
course.
we have to be careful, and I take that cue from you. We've got to be careful in over segmentalizing, because today we are cutting and slicing and so on. But actually, when you step back, there are issues that concern a whole lot of people, and I would say perhaps must concern a lot of people. Issues like the Gaza issue, and so on. These are not specific issues like cost of living, housing. These are issues about the values that we hold close to our hearts. What do they mean? And so on. So there are these broader issues that also needs to surface even as we tackle the tangible issues, And I think in that sense, this is an opportunity. I would say that this election is an opportunity for us to talk about taboo issues, talk about healing issues, talk about humanity issues, all of which are interrelated and all of which are linked to practical issues like cost of living. On that note, I'd like to say a big thank you, to Yulina, Gillian Ko, and of course, Inderjit Singh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the inconvenient conversations.